Hello, English learners. Welcome back to another podcast here with us at English Pod. My name is Marco.
And I'm Erica.
And today we have an advanced lesson for all of you and a very good one because we're going to be talking about a very serious topic, global warming.
That's right. And, even though most people agree that global warming is a big problem, there's still this sort of fringe element of people who believe that actually global warming doesn't exist.
Exactly. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. But before we tell you more or less what the dialogue is about, let's take a look at some words in Vocabulary Preview.
Vocabulary Preview.
We're going to look at two words here, and you'll hear both of these in the dialogue. So the first one is polar ice caps.
Polar ice caps.
Polar ice caps.
So when we talk about polar ice caps, polar is...
like the poles.
The poles, right?
The north and south poles of the Earth.
Okay, so the extreme...
the top and bottom.
The top and bottom of the planet.
Yep.
Okay, and what about ice caps?
So the polar ice caps are masses of ice that live or that exist on the top and the bottom of the world.
We have these big chunks of ice that are on the top and the bottom of the planet.
Yes, they're there all year round.
Okay, so these are the polar ice caps. What about our next word?
Well, next word is endangered species.
An endangered species.
An endangered species.
Okay, so endangered species.
It's a type of animal that is at risk of completely dying out.
Okay, so it's not completely extinct.
Right.
So there's
It's
still...
in danger.
Okay, in danger of.
Yeah.
So an example of endangered species would be...
the Bengal tigers.
Okay, the tigers or the pandas, right?
Or maybe gorillas.
Right, so all of these animals, there are very few of them left in the world, so they are endangered species.
Okay, so with that, I think we're just about ready to turn to our dialogue. Now, here we're going to learn a lot of language that you can use when you want to make an argument or express your point of view in a very sort of academic way. But Marco, what are we arguing about here?
So we're going to listen as a college professor is lecturing about global warming and, well, one of the students doesn't really agree with what he's saying.
And therefore, global warming is the greatest deception of the early 21st century. Questions?
Yeah. In the lecture, you said there's more evidence in the scientific record supporting global cooling?
Well, yes. Essentially, the historical record supports a theory of climate cycles. Warming and cooling are cooperating processes in the planetary ecosystem.
If that's true, and the planet is getting cooler, what explains the rapid melting of the polar ice caps and the dramatic rise in the global average temperatures?
But are global temperatures rising? If you look at the data from 1975, you'll
be misled. If you were serious, you would look at the record starting in the 1880s. Then you would see how dramatically the Earth's temperature has changed.
Young lady, I beg to differ. Look, the point of the lecture was to emphasize that there is evidence for both sides. And I'm putting forth the argument that there's greater evidence in support of the global cooling hypothesis. Look, it's an indisputable fact that the public is being manipulated and scared into believing that there's some kind of climate crisis. This scaremongering is done quite simply for political reasons.
But even without the uncomfortable reality that greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide contribute to global warming, isn't the topic appropriate for politicians to discuss?
Not if they want to use your tax dollars and mine to fund completely unnecessary initiatives.
Yeah, like conservation, protecting endangered species, and investing in renewable energy. At the very least, you have to concede that this debate has the potential to end our dependence on foreign oil. Buying oil supports autocratic countries that use these revenues to devastating ends.
I've never been so disrespected in all of my days. I'm a professor, a scientist, and a researcher of high regard.
Yeah, and a duplicitous one at that. Everyone knows you're in the pocket of the oil lobby. Why should we trust your so-called findings more than Tobacco Institute studies, which say smoking doesn't harm health? You're full of it.
Some people just cannot handle civil debate.
All right, so apparently this college professor is not very truthful in what he's saying, right?
Well, yeah, maybe he believes it, but they certainly have very strong and differing opinions.
So that's the interesting part, is that we heard a lot of language that she used to argue her point of view. So this is interesting, and we can start now looking at some of this language in Language Takeaway.
Language takeaway.
So the college professor was arguing against this idea of global warming, and she said, look, it's an indisputable fact.
Okay, an indisputable fact.
An indisputable fact.
Okay, so let's break it down and let's take a look at this word indisputable.
You can't argue against it.
Okay, so something indisputable is you can't argue with it, and well, a fact.
Something that's true.
Okay, so you can't argue with this truth.
Piece of information, yeah.
All right, indisputable fact.
So why don't we give a few examples? It's an indisputable fact that China is the most populous nation on Earth.
Okay, exactly. Or it's an indisputable fact that English Pod is the best podcast out there.
Indeed, it is indisputable.
All right, so indisputable fact. And what about our next word?
Well, the student accused the professor of scaremongering.
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 Okay, now this is kind of a strange word, scaremongering.
Yeah, and I think some examples will help us to understand the meaning a little bit better.
Example 1.
Software flaws are not the same as virus attacks, and saying otherwise is just scaremongering.
Example 2.
There's been a lot of scaremongering caused by the rumor that mobile phones cause cancer.
Okay, so basically we understand that it's kind of putting fear in people's minds.
Yeah, it's sort of like selling fear for your own benefit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so making people afraid for some objective or some purpose.
Yeah, and you know, this word reminds me of the word a fishmonger.
Okay, a fishmonger, what's that?
Which is basically a seller of fish. So a scaremonger is a seller of fear.
Okay, interesting. So now we have a way of remembering it.
Yes.
Scaremongering. All right, and moving on to our next word, we have autocratic.
Autocratic.
An autocratic country.
So an autocratic country is ruled by someone who holds total power.
Okay, so we have an autocratic country. So basically we have a leader that rules everything, right?
Right.
But we can apply it not only to a country, we can say a person is autocratic.
Yeah, you could say, I can't stand my boss's autocratic leadership style.
Or maybe a company.
This company is a very autocratic organization.
Okay, very good. And what about our last word?
The student accused the professor of being duplicitous.
Okay, so she said he is duplicitous.
Yes, duplicitous.
All right, what does that mean?
When you are duplicitous, you have behavior that is dishonest and is designed to trick people.
Okay, so you're not a very honest person if you're duplicitous.
Yeah, you're telling lies as a means of making people do something or tricking them.
Okay, very good. So a duplicitous person or a duplicitous idea, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so these are all the words that we have on language takeaway today. But now let's move on to some very interesting phrases that we can use to put forward some arguments in Fluency Builder.
Fluency Builder.
Okay, and Marco, you actually just mentioned our first phrase, which is I'm putting forth the argument that.
Okay, so putting forth the argument that. So if you put forth an argument,
you present it.
You present it, or you push it towards somebody.
Yeah, you give it.
So can we just put forth an argument?
Well, actually, you can put forth a lot of things, like put forth a suggestion.
Okay, I'm putting forth a suggestion that we should get a new computer.
Or an idea.
Tim put forth the idea that we should go on vacation to Hawaii.
Ooh, good idea.
All right, so you can put forth many different things.
So the professor obviously is putting forth the argument that global warming is a myth. And the student obviously totally disagreed. And she said, you have to concede that.
Okay, you have to concede that.
You have to concede that.
All right, so this word concede, or you have to concede, why don't we listen to some examples before we listen to the meaning?
Example 1.
I'm sorry, but I can't concede with you on this point.
Example 2.
Julie conceded that she might have forgotten her sister's birthday.
Example 3.
Both philosophers conceded that their philosophies have some errors.
Okay, so you have to concede that. Basically, you have to agree that this one point in my argument is true.
Maybe you're arguing many different points with somebody, but you tell them, well, you have to concede that the earth is round.
Okay, so that part I can't argue with. It's really true.
Okay, very good. So concede.
Now, at the end of the dialogue, the student accused the professor of being in the pocket of the oil lobby.
Okay, so he's in the pocket of.
To be in the pocket of.
All right, so if I have somebody in my pocket, what does that mean?
It means basically you're bribing them.
Okay, so maybe I have the senator in my pocket.
Okay, so obviously you're paying the senator to do what you want.
Okay, very good. So it's another way, it's a very informal way of saying I'm bribing somebody or that person is being bribed.
That's right.
All
So
right.
why don't we move to our final phrase? And the students was talking about the professor's so-called findings.
Okay, so your so-called findings.
So-called.
So this word so-called.
You use this word when you want to take away from the importance of an idea.
Or all right, so I use it before a noun, right?
Right. So for example, my so-called friends.
Okay, so these friends are not really your friends maybe.
So yeah, they're friends in name, but they don't act like friends.
Okay, so you can say my so-called job.
Okay, so maybe you kind of go to work but do nothing all day.
Right, or maybe you don't even really like what you do.
Right.
Right, so my so-called job, my so-called friends, or maybe my so-called teacher.
Okay, so this is a bad teacher.
Exactly. So we use it a lot with many different nouns, right?
That's right. So that's our last phrase for Fluency Builder. Now, I think it'll help us to understand these words and phrases a little bit better, to hear them again in context.
And therefore, global warming is the greatest deception of the early 21st century. Questions?
Yeah. In the lecture, you said there's more evidence in the scientific record supporting global cooling.
Well, yes. Essentially, the historical record supports a theory of climate cycles. Warming and cooling are cooperating processes in the planetary ecosystem.
If that's true, and the planet is getting cooler, what explains the rapid melting of the polar ice caps and the dramatic rise in the global average temperatures?
But are global temperatures rising? If you look at the data from 1975,
You'll be misled. If you were serious, you would look at the record starting in the 1880s. Then you would see how dramatically the Earth's temperature has changed.
Young lady, I beg to differ. Look, the point of the lecture was to emphasize that there is evidence for both sides. And I'm putting forth the argument that there's greater evidence in support of the global cooling hypothesis. Look, it's an indisputable fact that the public is being manipulated and scared into believing that there's some kind of climate crisis. This scaremongering is done quite simply for political reasons.
But even without the uncomfortable reality that greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide contribute to global warming, isn't the topic appropriate for politicians to discuss?
Not if they want to use your tax dollars and mine to fund completely unnecessary initiatives.
Yeah, like conservation, protecting endangered species, and investing in renewable energy. At the very least, you have to concede that this debate has the potential to end our dependence on foreign oil. Buying oil supports autocratic countries that use these revenues to devastating ends.
Boy, I've never been so disrespected in all of my days. I'm a professor, a scientist, and a researcher of high regard.
Yeah, and a duplicitous one at that. Everyone knows you're in the pocket of the oil lobby. Why should we trust your so-called findings more than Tobacco Institute studies, which say smoking doesn't harm health? You're full of it.
Some people just cannot handle civil debate.
All right, very good. So, interesting ways of putting forth arguments, and well, it's an interesting topic and very controversial, right?
That's right. But what I noticed in this dialogue is that the student was pretty assertive in putting forth her argument and standing up to the teacher.
Right. She argued with the teacher a lot, and this is interesting because it's a very cultural aspect, I think, right?
Yeah. In North American universities, there is this idea that it's really important to think critically and to argue against different ideas, and to really speak up when you don't agree with something.
Right. So basically there's this culture of questioning.
Yeah,
not only
yeah.
what you're being taught, but you can also question the teacher. You don't actually have to believe everything that the teacher is saying.
Exactly. And actually, I think this situation is really interesting. You know, you always go to these lectures and there's always a question and answer period at the end of the lectures. And I think that there's like this group of sort of academically minded people who feel like it's really cool to ask these really difficult questions and engage in arguments with the profs.
Yeah, that's really true. But actually, she used a lot of polite language and a lot of polite ways of actually arguing with the professor until the last point when she said, "You're full of it."
Yeah, you're full of it.
Right? You're full of it.
So what's she saying here?
All right, she's basically saying that you're full of shit.
Marco.
So yeah, you wouldn't really say that. So to be a little bit less rude, you would just say you're full of it.
Yeah, but that is one step too far. I think this would be considered a little bit rude in university.
For a professor, yeah. But I guess if you don't believe what your friend is telling you, or maybe he's exaggerating, you can say, "Oh, you're full of it."
Have you ever questioned everything you thought you knew? Imagine hearing something that makes you rethink your beliefs, something that challenges everything you've been taught. In today's story, Max embarks on a journey that begins with one simple question. What about you? Have you ever been faced with a moment that completely changed your perspective? Hello, my name is Max, and I want to tell you something that changed my life forever. It all started on a normal, sunny afternoon when I was walking through the park near my house. I had just finished work and decided to take a stroll to clear my mind. I loved the peaceful atmosphere there, the trees, the flowers, and the birds singing. But on this particular day, something strange caught my eye. As I walked along the path, I saw a man standing by the large oak tree at the edge of the park. He looked out of place, wearing a thick coat, even though it wasn't cold. I thought it was odd, but I didn't pay much attention to him. However, when I passed by, I heard him talking to himself. His words sounded like he was arguing with someone. "Global warming is a myth," he said loudly, almost angrily. "The ice caps are not melting. It's all just a lie." I stopped and stared at him for a moment. Was he crazy? Or was he just joking? I couldn't believe what I had heard. I knew a lot about global warming, of course. Who didn't? Everyone talked about it. Scientists, news programs, even my friends. But this man was saying the opposite. Curious, I decided to walk a bit closer. The man didn't notice me, lost in his own thoughts. He continued, "They want to control us, make us afraid of something that isn't even real. It's all politics." I felt confused. Was this really the truth? The idea that global warming wasn't real seemed impossible to me. I'd seen the news reports about the polar ice caps melting, the rising temperatures, and the changes in weather patterns around the world. So why was this man so sure it wasn't happening? I stood there for a few minutes, watching him. My mind was racing with questions. Was he right? Could global warming really be a lie? Or was he just a person who didn't want to believe the facts? My head was spinning with so many ideas. As I walked away, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just heard. The thought that everything I believed about the environment could be wrong was disturbing. But what if this man had something to say that I needed to listen to? Maybe I had been missing something important. From that day on, I couldn't stop asking myself one question. Could the world be lying to us about global warming? I had to find out the truth. The next day, I couldn't shake the thoughts from my mind. I had to learn more. What if that man was right? What if all the warnings about global warming were exaggerated or, worse, completely wrong? I decided to do something I had never done before. I would research this on my own. I went straight to the library after work. It felt a bit strange, walking between the rows of books, looking for something so important. I wasn't a scientist, just an average person trying to make sense of the world. But if there was one thing I knew, it was that knowledge was power. I needed to know the truth. I started by searching for books and articles about global warming. At first, everything I found seemed to support what I already knew. The ice caps were melting, sea levels were rising, and extreme weather events were becoming more frequent. I even found graphs showing the rise in global temperatures over the years. The evidence was clear. But as I dug deeper, I began to come across articles that challenged these ideas. I found one written by a scientist who argued that the Earth goes through natural cycles of warming and cooling. This scientist said that the rise in temperatures could just be part of a natural process and not necessarily caused by human activity. He suggested that if we look at data from the past, we can see similar warming and cooling patterns that happened long before we even started burning fossil fuels. I was intrigued, but also confused. How could two different sides present such convincing arguments? On one hand, there were the scientists who warned us about the dangers of climate change, and on the other, there were those who claimed it wasn't as big of a problem as we thought. I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the park. He had said that the media and politicians were using global warming as a tool to control people. Was that true? Were we all being manipulated? The more I researched, the more questions I had. I knew I had to get more information, but I didn't know where to look next. I was just one person trying to make sense of something far bigger than me. But I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to stop until I found the real answers. The days went by quickly as I continued my research, but the questions never seemed to end. I read article after article, watching videos and interviews with experts, but it only seemed to make things more complicated. There was so much information, and yet I couldn't find any clear answers. It felt like I was stuck in the middle of a never-ending debate. One afternoon, I decided to attend a local talk about climate change. The event was being held at a community center, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to hear both sides of the argument from experts in the field. The room was full of people, young and old, students, professionals, and retirees, all there to learn more about this topic that was on everyone's mind. The talk began with a professor from a well-known university. He was a serious-looking man with glasses and a calm voice. Global warming is one of the greatest challenges of our time, he said, as he began showing a slideshow of melting glaciers, rising sea levels, and wildfires. His message was clear. The evidence is undeniable. We must act now, or we will face catastrophic consequences. The crowd was quiet, but there was a feeling of agreement in the room. Everyone seemed to nod their heads as they watched the images on the screen. It was hard not to feel a sense of urgency. The facts seemed to speak for themselves. Then, just as the professor was finishing his presentation, a young woman in the back of the room raised her hand. She stood up and spoke confidently. "I'm sorry, but I have to disagree with some of what you've said." The room went silent. People turned to look at her, surprised by her boldness. The professor, who had been speaking for over an hour, seemed taken aback, but he invited her to explain. "The data you're showing is correct, but there's another side to the story. There's evidence that suggests the Earth's climate has always gone through cycles of warming and cooling. This is nothing new. And yet we're being told that human activity is the main cause of global warming. How can we be sure of that?" The professor looked at her for a moment, clearly uncomfortable, before responding, "The evidence for human-caused climate change is overwhelming. The burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and industrial activities have all contributed to the rise in carbon dioxide levels, which is directly linked to global warming. But what about the natural cycles? What if this warming is just part of a natural process that's been happening for millions of years? Are we sure we're not just jumping to conclusions?" The room was tense. People were listening closely, but no one seemed to know what to say. The professor responded, "We have to consider the evidence. The speed at which the Earth is warming now is far greater than in any natural cycle in history. We cannot ignore the role of human activity." The debate continued for another hour, with the audience split between those who believed in human-caused climate change and those who questioned the evidence. It was clear that this was not an easy issue to solve. The more I listened, the more I realized how divided the world was on this issue. No one seemed to agree on the facts. I left the event feeling even more confused than before. The arguments on both sides made sense in their own way, and yet neither felt completely convincing. Was the truth somewhere in the middle, or were we simply not asking the right questions? As I walked home that evening, I thought back to the man in the park. Maybe he wasn't entirely wrong. But if global warming was real, what did that mean for us? What was the truth? And who could we trust? The next few days were filled with a sense of frustration. My mind was clouded with conflicting opinions and endless questions. I had thought that attending the talk would give me clear answers, but instead it had only made things more complicated. I began to wonder if there would ever be a time when I could trust the information I was finding. It was late one evening when I received a phone call that would change everything. It was from an old friend, Jake, who I hadn't spoken to in years. Jake was an environmental scientist who had moved abroad to work on research projects focused on climate change. I was surprised to hear from him, but I was even more surprised when he said, "Max, I heard you've been looking into the global warming debate. I think I can help." I invited him over the next day, eager to hear what he had to say. Jake arrived with a bag full of papers, articles, and a laptop. As he sat down across from me, he began to speak with a calm but serious tone. "You're right to question things," he said. "There is a lot of misinformation out there, and not everything you hear on the news or read online is completely accurate." I listened closely, knowing that Jake was someone who had spent years studying environmental science. He continued, "The problem with the climate change debate is that it has become so politicized. People are quick to pick sides, whether they understand the science or not. It's become less about facts and more about opinions and agendas." I asked him what he thought about the evidence for global warming. He paused before answering. "There is no doubt that the planet is warming. The data is clear about that. What's not so clear is how much of it is caused by human activity versus natural factors." I nodded. This was the question that had been on my mind for so long. "So, you're saying we can't be sure?" Jake smiled gently. "Exactly. The Earth's climate has always gone through cycles of warming and cooling. It's part of the natural system. However, the rapid changes we are seeing now are unlike anything we've seen in the past. The speed of the warming is concerning, but we also need to take into account the role of natural cycles and the complexity of the Earth's systems." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For the first time, someone wasn't just pushing one side of the argument. Jake was giving me a balanced perspective, one that considered all possibilities. "So, what should we do?" I asked. "First, we need to stop demonizing one side or the other. We need to look at the evidence with an open mind and take action based on what we know, not what we fear. Yes, we should reduce emissions, invest in renewable energy, and protect ecosystems. But we shouldn't ignore the fact that the Earth's history of fluctuating temperatures. We need to find a balance between addressing human impact and understanding the natural world. I sat in silence, absorbing what he had said. It made so much sense, yet it was so different from what I had heard in the media. I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Finally, I had a clearer view of the situation. Jake continued, "There's no simple answer, Max. But the most important thing is that we all need to start thinking for ourselves. Don't just trust what's being said. Research, ask questions, and make your own decisions." That night, as I lay in bed thinking about our conversation, I realized that the journey to the truth wasn't about finding a single answer. It was about understanding the complexity of the issue and being willing to keep searching, questioning, and learning. It was then that I knew the real challenge wasn't just about global warming. It was about learning to navigate a world filled with so much information, some true and some false. But I also knew that no matter what, I had to keep moving forward. In the weeks that followed my conversation with Jake, I continued my research. But now I had a new perspective, one that allowed me to see both sides of the global warming debate with more clarity. I understood that the issue was far more complex than I had originally thought, and it wasn't just about agreeing or disagreeing with the facts. It was about understanding the science, the politics, and the many forces at play. I also began to notice something unsettling. The more I dug, the more I realized that many of the experts I had trusted were not as objective as I had believed. Some had strong political or financial interests behind their work, while others seemed determined to push a certain agenda. It was frustrating, to say the least. How could I, as an ordinary person, navigate through all this misinformation and bias? One afternoon, I met up with my old friend, Lisa. She was an environmental activist who had been fighting for climate action for years. We sat down at a cafe, and after a few minutes of catching up, I brought up the topic that had been consuming my thoughts. "So, Lisa," I began carefully, "what do you think about all the debates on climate change? I mean, is global warming really happening, or is it just part of a natural cycle?" Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward. "Max, I think you're asking the wrong question. Of course, the Earth has gone through cycles of warming and cooling throughout history. But what we're seeing now isn't like that. The speed at which the climate is changing, the evidence of human activity contributing to it, those things can't be ignored." I hesitated, but some scientists say that the evidence for global warming is overstated, that the data from earlier periods shows warming trends that weren't caused by human activity. She shook her head. "Yes, some people say that, but think about it. The planet's ecosystems are being destroyed at an alarming rate. Rainforests are disappearing, species are going extinct, and the oceans are becoming more acidic. Those aren't natural occurrences. They're a result of human activity." I wasn't sure what to say. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt from my previous research kept creeping back into my mind. But if we're causing it, isn't it our responsibility to fix it? Of course, but it's not just about us. It's about the future. It's about protecting the world for the generations that come after us. It's about saving the species, the habitats, and the natural systems that make life possible. Whether or not we're the sole cause of global warming, we have a moral obligation to make it right. I sat back in my chair, letting her words sink in. I had heard many arguments before, but this one felt different. Lisa wasn't just talking about the science. She was speaking from the heart, as someone who deeply cared about the world and its future. There was a passion in her voice that I couldn't ignore. As I walked home that evening, I thought about our conversation. The dilemma in my mind had only grown stronger. Could we really ignore the evidence of climate change and its impacts on the environment? Should we be more concerned about the future of our planet, even if there were still uncertainties about the exact causes? Or was the issue more complicated than we were being told? I couldn't help but feel torn. On one hand, I understood the importance of taking action and protecting the Earth. On the other, I still wasn't fully convinced that human activity was the sole cause of the warming. I felt like I was standing on a tightrope, balancing between two worlds, one of skepticism and the other of urgency. The truth was, I didn't know what to believe anymore. But I knew one thing for sure. The world couldn't continue down this path without facing serious consequences. Whether global warming was caused by humans or a part of a natural cycle, something had to change. And that thought haunted me as I lay in bed that night, wondering where the road ahead would take me. Days turned into weeks, and the questions I had been grappling with only seemed to grow more intense. I had spent so much time trying to find clear answers. But now I was beginning to realize that perhaps the search for absolute truth might never be fully satisfied. There was always another article to read, another expert to listen to, and more opinions to consider. It was overwhelming, but something had shifted in me. I realized that maybe for the first time, I wasn't just looking for scientific evidence. I was looking for a deeper understanding, a sense of purpose. The environment wasn't just an abstract concept anymore. It was something that I was connected to, and its fate was tied to my own. That was when I received a message from Jake. It had been a few weeks since we had last talked, but when I saw his name pop up on my phone, I couldn't ignore it. I immediately called him. Jake said, "Max, I think I have something important for you. I've been working on a new project, and I want you to be a part of it." I was intrigued. "What's the project?" "We're starting a grassroots campaign to raise awareness about climate change, but not just in the usual way. We want to focus on action, not just the science or politics, but how ordinary people can make a difference in their own communities." It sounded like a huge undertaking, but something in Jake's voice made me feel that this was the right step. For so long, I had been caught in the debate between sides, unsure of where I stood. But what if instead of trying to find the right answer, the solution was to take action? "What kind of action?" I asked, eager to know more. "Things like reducing waste, supporting renewable energy, helping local farmers adopt sustainable practices. Simple actions that, when combined, could lead to real change. It's about empowering people to make a difference no matter where they are or what they believe." I paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. It was a far cry from the political debates I had been reading about. It wasn't about convincing people of the science behind global warming. It was about getting people to take responsibility for their environment, regardless of their opinions on the cause. "I'm in," I said, feeling more certain than I had in weeks. Over the next few months, Jake and I worked on the campaign. We reached out to local businesses, schools, and community groups. We organized cleanup events, planted trees, and held workshops on sustainable living. It wasn't easy, and we faced challenges along the way. Some people were skeptical, others didn't see the need to act. But the more we worked, the more we realized something important. Real change started at the local level. We weren't going to solve global warming in one day, and we weren't going to convince everyone that it was an urgent problem, but we could make a difference in our own small ways. And that's exactly what we did. The campaign grew, attracting more people who shared our passion for change. We might not have had all the answers, but we were doing something. One afternoon, as we were setting up for another tree planting event, Jake pulled me aside. "I'm proud of what we've accomplished, Max. This campaign isn't just about the environment, it's about people coming together. And that's the real solution." I smiled. He was right. It wasn't just about proving who was right or wrong, it was about finding a way to work together, regardless of the debates and doubts. As the sun set over the park where we were planting trees, I realized that the path that I had been on for so long, The search for answers in books, debates, and articles had led me to this point. I may not have all the answers, but I had found my place in this fight, and that, in itself, was enough. As the months passed, the campaign began to gather momentum. What started as a small group of passionate individuals grew into something much bigger. People from different walks of life, with varying beliefs and backgrounds, came together, united by the simple desire to make a positive change for the environment. It wasn't about convincing people to take one side of the argument over the other. It was about giving them the tools and knowledge to take responsibility for their own impact on the world. Jake and I continued to lead the project, but we were no longer doing it alone. Local businesses started partnering with us, offering resources and support. Schools began incorporating environmental lessons into their curriculums, and families started making small, sustainable changes in their daily lives. It was amazing to watch how something so simple, a conversation, a community event, a tree planted, could spark a bigger movement. One afternoon, I was at the community center organizing an event when an older man approached me. He had a weathered face, the kind of face that had seen many years of hard work, and his hands were rough from labor. He looked at me, smiled, and said, "You know, I've been skeptical about all this climate change talk, but after seeing how this project is changing things around here, I'm starting to believe that we can make a real difference." His words hit me hard. He was a man who had lived through decades of change, and for him to admit that he was wrong about something meant that we had made an impact. It wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about showing them the power of collective action. As I spoke with him, I realized something important. This was the true value of what we were doing. It wasn't about winning debates or having all the right answers. It was about inspiring people to take action, to look at the world with open eyes, and to find ways to make it better, no matter how small their individual contribution might seem. A few weeks later, we held our biggest event yet, a community fair with workshops, food trucks, and games, all focused on sustainability. We invited everyone, from environmental experts to local farmers, to share their knowledge. It was a celebration of what we had achieved, but more importantly, it was a reminder that real change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, effort, and most importantly, collaboration. As I walked around the fair, talking to people and watching families interact with the exhibits, I felt a deep sense of pride. We had built something together, and in doing so, we had opened up a new way of thinking about the world. People weren't just talking about global warming anymore. They were talking about solutions. They were discussing how to reduce waste, how to use less energy, how to protect the land and the animals. It was a powerful shift, one that I knew would continue to grow. Jake joined me near the stage as the event began to wind down. "You did it, Max," he said with a grin. "We did it." I looked around at the smiling faces, the conversations happening all around us, and felt a sense of accomplishment. "No," I said, shaking my head. "We didn't do it alone. This is all of us. This is what happens when people come together and decide to make a change." The evening ended with a sunset that bathed the park in golden light, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. I had come a long way from the man who had doubted everything, searching for the truth in books and articles. Now I understood something more important. The truth wasn't always about finding one single answer. Sometimes it was about doing what you could with what you had, and trusting that the collective effort would make a difference in the end. And as I looked out at the community we had built, I realized that this was only the beginning. The months that followed were filled with even more progress. Our campaign grew beyond the small community where it started. Other towns and cities took notice of what we had achieved and reached out to learn how they could start their own efforts. It was humbling, yet empowering to see that what we had begun on a small scale had rippled out to create a larger movement. But even with all the growth and success, the journey had its challenges. There were still many people who didn't believe in climate change or who thought the problem was too big to fix. It wasn't always easy to convince them. There were days when it felt like the task ahead was insurmountable. But as I had learned throughout this journey, the key wasn't in convincing everyone. It was in doing what we could, where we could, and trusting that those small steps would eventually add up. One evening, Jake and I sat at a cafe reflecting on everything we had accomplished. Our project had spread to over 20 cities, and the momentum continued to grow. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Jake said, looking out the window. "We started with just a handful of people, and now it's a movement." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "It's more than I could have imagined. I never thought we'd reach so many people. But what's more important is that people are changing. They're not just talking about climate change anymore. They're doing something about it." Jake smiled. "And you're part of that change, Max. You found your way, and now you're helping others find theirs." It was true. I had come a long way from the days when I was lost in the confusion of the climate debate. I had started by questioning everything, unsure of what to believe. But through that journey, I had discovered the power of action. Whether the science was settled or not, I had learned that the world needed people who cared enough to try, to reduce waste, to protect resources, and to make a difference, even in small ways. As I sat there with Jake, I thought about the man I had met in the park, the one who had questioned everything. It was strange to think that his words had sparked this entire journey for me. Had he not challenged my beliefs that day, I might never have asked the hard questions or looked deeper into the issue. In a way, that moment had been the catalyst for everything that followed. But now I realized the question was no longer about whether or not global warming was real. The question was about what we as individuals could do to protect the world we lived in. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. We all had a role to play in shaping it. And as I left the cafe that night, I felt a deep sense of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was one worth traveling. I wasn't just searching for the truth anymore. I had found it, not in the perfect answer, but in the collective effort to make the world a better place. And that was enough. The journey wasn't over. It was just the beginning.
Listen to the meaning, then say the vocabulary word. The increase of the world's temperature due to pollution.
Global warming.
The change in the world's temperature and weather patterns.
Climate change.
The act of making others believe something false.
Deception.
Fuel made with dead animals or plants, such as oil, gas, natural gas.
Fossil fuel.
Of or relating to planets.
Planetary.
The action of cutting down forests.
Deforestation.
Everything that exists in a certain environment.
Ecosystem.
The act of producing gas.
Emission.
The thick layer of ice or snow on the poles.
Polar ice cap.
Support a point of view.
Endorse.
Be led to make believe something not true.
Mislead.
A polite way to show you do not agree with someone.
Beg to differ.
Highlight.
Emphasize.
Give out. Announce to the public.
Put forth.
So true that does not need to be discussed anymore.
Indisputable.
Influence someone's ideas for your own benefit.
Manipulate.
Saying something so as to frighten people.
Scaremongering.
A gas that increases the global temperature.
Greenhouse gases.
Type of animal in danger of dying out.
Endangered species.
To say that you do not deny something's true.
Concede.
With total power.
Autocratic.
Result or outcome.
End.
Deceiving, dishonest.
Duplicitous.
Being illegally bribed or paid by someone.
In the pocket of.
Used to show the name is not really suitable.
So-called.
Let's try that faster. The act of making others believe something false.
Deception.
Type of animal in danger of dying out.
Endangered species.
So true that does not need to be discussed anymore.
Indisputable.
Result or outcome.
End.
The thick layer of ice or snow on the poles.
Polar ice cap.
With total power.
Autocratic.
The action of cutting down forests.
Deforestation.
The act of producing gas.
Emission.
Be led to make believe something not true.
Mislead.
Saying something so as to frighten people.
Scaremongering.
Give out. Announce the public.
Put forth.
The change in the world's temperature and weather patterns.
Climate change.
Highlight.
Emphasize.
The increase of the world's temperature due to pollution.
Global warming.
Of or relating to planets.
Planetary.
Support a point of view.
Endorse.
Used to show the name is not really suitable.
So-called.
A gas that increases the global temperature.
Greenhouse gases.
To say that you do not deny something's true.
Concede.
A polite way to show you do not agree with someone.
Beg to differ.
Influence someone's ideas for your own benefit.
Manipulate.
Everything that exists in a certain environment.
Ecosystem.
Fuel made with dead animals or plants, such as oil, gas, natural gas.
Fossil fuel.
Being illegally bribed or paid by someone.
In the pocket of.
Deceiving, dishonest.
Duplicitous.
Now say the word and hear it in a sentence.
Beg to differ. You said money is the most important thing in life, but I beg to differ. In my opinion, the best things in life are free. Beg to differ. Most people believe that the internet is giving us greater freedom of expression. I beg to differ. Beg to differ. I would beg to differ with the idea that we need to downsize. If we just reorganize our system of communication, we could optimize efficiency. I know that you don't believe in raising taxes, but at the very least you have to admit that this is the best way for our government to raise money. If we're not going to learn from our mistakes, at the very least, let's not repeat them. Even if you can't say the whole time, at the very least, show up at the party and say hi. In the pocket of. You know Judge Smith is in the pocket of the criminals, because he always declares them innocent. In the pocket of. Car manufacturers are in the pockets of the big oil producers. That's why they haven't developed electric cars yet. In the pocket of. I think the senator is in the pocket of the tobacco industry. He keeps promoting their interests. So-called. My so-called friends are spreading rumors about me. So-called. This so-called cost savings plan is actually costing us more money. So-called. The so-called disaster actually opened up a lot of opportunities for us. You're so full of it. You've never been to the moon. Don't believe a word Tom says. He's full of it. I think this argument is full of it. There's no way that the global temperature is getting cooler.